All right, Shabbos, good morning, good night, everyone. Let's begin. So we are picking up. And today's daf is daf mem. We are picking up on daf mem, 6 lines down from the top. Amar Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda says the following: Lilkos ba'achos la'akev b'shtayim lista ena soser ela barov rosho ubetar. So Rav Chisda puts forward a number of important halachos. Number one, Lilkos ba'achos. Rashi says Shem gilach toch malos sa'ar achos loka. That if a Nazir goes in and cuts even one hair over during the duration of his neder naziris, he gets malchus. Next, la'akiv b'shtayim, Rashi says, Shem gilach kol sa'aro b'taglacha sof yemei niziru. So, b'shir bo beis sa'aros la'asar v'lo klum. If when shaving his head at the end of his neder nazirus, the Nazir leaves behind 2 or more hairs, so then Lamaisa, that's considered as if the head shaving, did not occur, and soser ela barov rosho. But in order to go ahead and totally negate a neder nazirus, it only happens if what? If the Nazir shaved the majority of his head. So we'll say there's 3 halachos. Number 1, if a Nazir cuts even one hair, he gets malchus. Number 2, when shaving his head at the end of his neder nazirus, if it leaves behind 2 or more hairs, that is ma'akev. And number 3, the only time that he has to start his neder nazirus over again is if he shaves the majority of his head. Furthermore, says the Gemara ubetar, or it says Rav Chisda, and this is talking about again with a razor. So the Gemara says betar and immediately lo. Are you telling me that the Nazir is only? And I will say now the assumption is that Rav Chisda's statement about a razor applies to all the previous stated cases. So is that true that a Nazir is only chayiv if he cuts his head with a razor? Nothing, it was something else not. But we learned Minayim the Rabbos Eskala Ma'avirin. How do we know that all of the halachos concerning hair cutting, whatever type of hair cutting I will say, refers to all types of items that could remove hair? Remember, so we learned this in yesterday's daf, because the Gemara darshaned lo ya'avar, that lo ya'avar refers to any method of hair removal is usher for the Nazir. So that comes to include things other than just the razor. Rather, instead, what Rav Chisda means to say is that the only time that a Nazir is chayiv is if he cuts his hair with something that is like a razor. What does that mean? If you take a look at Rashi, Ela ke'intar, kala ma'avirin samoch le'ikaron. Was it just like a razor removes the hair at its root? So too, again, one is only chayiv for hair removal if one removes the hair at the root. Now this is important because if you remember again yesterday, we had a discussion that there was a havamina that halacha l'maisa, again, even if you removed part of the hair, that you would be chayiv. For that, it appears that according to Rav Chisda, a Nazir is only chayiv. So for example, if a Nazir were to trim certain hairs, it would appear that at least according to Rav Chisda, he would not be chayiv, because he's only chayiv again for hair removal that takes place at the root itself. Tanya, we have here a brayso that supports this. Nazir shetalash mirit sif seif kol shuhu. So Nazir goes ahead and uproots. Remember again, these are all talash mirit sif seif, are all different types of hair removal, either by hand or with a depilatory. So kol shu ena soser. He does not go ahead and ruin his neder nazirus. Ella berov rosha ubetar. The only time that a Nazir has to go ahead and start his neder nazirus again is if he shaves the majority of his head, and he does so with a razor. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Shimon, Keshem shtei sa'aros ma'akvos bo, kach shtei sa'aros sosros bo. So what Rabbi Shimon says, something very interesting. Rabbi Shimon says the same way that 2 hairs are ma'akev, namely, that if at the end of his Nazirite vow, the Nazir is cutting his hair, and he leaves behind 2 hairs, the same way that leaving behind 2 hairs is ma'akev, it creates as if he did not shave his head. So you see that 2 hairs are significant. So too, if a Nazir cuts 2 hairs, he also will be soser than neder nazirus. So we'll say, so fundamental machlokas in terms of how much hair cutting actually causes the Nazir to start all over again. So Rav Chisda's opinion ultimately again that he's only chayiv if he cuts rov rosho, the majority of his head, and Reb Shimon's opinion that halacha l'maisa, even cutting 2 hairs, ultimately will go ahead and destroy. When I say soser, I don't know what the good English word is, but it demolishes the neder nazirus, meaning that you have to start all over again. So fundamental machlokas.
At the root.
I'm sorry.
At the root.
At the roots. So where everybody seems to be agreeing that l'maisa again, you only chayiv for cutting the hair at the root itself.
Shimon say you also get malchus
Yes.
So you start again and you get
Correct. So because remember, you're always going to get malchus because you're cutting your hair. The only shaila is, does it also require you to start the Neder Nazirus over again? So Tanan Hasam, so also we learned there, Shlosha Megalchin. So also, so first of all, just so you should know, interestingly enough, so the Rambam over here, Paskins, this is in Perek Vav, Halacha Aleph and Hilchos Nazirus. So the Rambam Paskins, like Rav Chisda, Nisgalach Rov Rosho. If the Nazir goes ahead, well, first of all, Nisgalach Rov Rosho. If the Nazir shaves the majority of his head, bein betar, bein ke'ein tar, whether he uses a razor or something like a razor, meaning below nisha min sa'aros, there's nothing left of the hair. That's what it means, like a razor. It cuts it off at the root. What's the halacha? He says, Bein bizadon, bein bishkaga, he quotes what we said yesterday, Kedei lakov roshan likarn. But interesting enough, when we say cutting it off at the root, it doesn't literally mean that there doesn't have to be a hair there. What it means is that the hair is not long enough that it can be bent over to the root, like we saw yesterday. Bein bizadon, bein bishkaga, afilu gilchu listim ba'onis, harizes soser shloshim yom, so both say Saloch Lai said Rambam Paskins like Rav Chisda. Namely, again, that in order for a Nazir to go ahead and have to start his Neder Nazirus again, there has to be a shaving of the majority of the head. It doesn't have to be with a razor, but it has to be razor-like, and that it takes it down to the root. But in essence, Rambam kind of adds in, it doesn't necessarily have to be up until the root, but it has to be short enough that the hair could not be bent over back down to the root itself. So says the Gemara, Tanan Hasam. So we learned there. Shlosha Megalchin. There are three people that require a shaving. And we say shaving, we're not just talking about your face. We'll see what we're talking about. V'taglachas mitzvah. And their shaving is a mitzvah. Who are these three people? Nazir, umitzora, uleviim. So let's say, so the three people are, again, the Nazir. The mitzora person, again, remember at the end of his sara'as process, he's shaved. And Levium, I will say no, Levium, don't get nervous, Levium, right? Remember, again, this was a din just in the initial consecration of the Levium. This, by the way, is actually, there's so much machlokas among the Mefarshim, what exactly happened to the Levium when they were inducted into Levitic service. And the reason, I'm sorry? Like a haze, right? Like lahavdil, right? So, I was not going to say anything remotely resembling that, but okay, I hear it. So there's a fundamental machlokes in terms of what happened to the Levium. Was it just a head shaving, or was it a full body shaving? So, for example, the Sefer HaChinuch actually brings down that it was a full body shaving, like mitzora. And why would you shave the Levium full body shaving? So actually, the Sefer HaChinuch says was to make them look like babies, rebirth. Literally was to be a rebirth into Levitic service. Other Mefarshim, I mean, as I say, that's no way it was a whole body shaving. They would look ridiculous. So Ezra understands that ultimately it was a head shaving. Ultimately, again, what he said actually is part of their Tara process. In any event, we're not going to get into that now. The point the Gemara makes over here is that there are three different shavings. The kulon shegilchu shelo betar, o sheshayru shtei saros lo asav lo klum. And the common denominator, as much as each of these shavings are different, as we'll discuss, because you also remember, Nazir is just a shaving of his head. Mitzora is a shaving of his entire body. Levi, it's a machlokes as to what it is. But here's the common denominator, is that if you leave behind two hairs, then halacha l'maisa, the shaving is incomplete. Shaving is deficient, and it's as if you didn't shave at all. Amar Mar, Shlosha Magalchim v'taglachas mitzvah pshita. So Mar says, 1 second. You said before, quoting from the Mishnah, that there are three people whose shavings are mitzvahs. So this is a pashat. I mean, why does the Mishnah need to say this? We know it's a mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Ma'utem, what would I have thought? Mishum avurei sarhu ba'avilusach nasha. So I would have thought like this. I might have thought that the idea of all three of these people, the Nazir, the Mitzora, and the Levi, is the removal of hair. And therefore what? I might have said to myself that even had you gone ahead and removed the hair with what? Some type of cream or some type of depilatory, that would be enough. Kamash malon delo. Therefore the Mishnah teaches me that no, what's the mitzvah bosai? The mitzvah is betar. The mitzvah is with a razor. It's not just simply to remove the hair, but it's to remove the hair with a razor. That's the din of the mitzvah, of the Nazir, of the Mitzora, and of the Levi. The Gemara says, Katani, the kulon shegilcho shelo betar. So remember again, the Mishnah says the Mishnah just quoted above says that any of them that were shaved without a razor, or if you left behind 2 hairs, then it's as if the shaving has not been done. Okay, so we see over here again, the ikr over here is that if you did not use a razor, it's as if the shaving was not done. So it says the Gemara Bishlam Agabi Nazir Ksiv Ta'ar Lo Ya'avro Arosho. So I understand by Nazir. What does it say by Nazir? It says that all of the days of his Naziros, so a razor shall not pass over his body. So we'll say, so what do we darshan from that? We darshan that, however, at the end of his Neder Nazirus, when he has an obligation to cut his hair, what do you do it with? You do it with a razor. Must be done with a razor. Okay, so we established that already. So the Gemara said, the Gabe Leviim Ksiv, and so too by the Levi it says, V'ha'aviru tar al kol b'saram. It says you have to go out and pass a razor over their flesh. Ela mitzora b'tar minalam. Rabbi will say, interestingly enough, all the Torah says is that the mitzora has to have a shaving. But yet tar, razor, is never mentioned in conjunction with mitzora. So here's what's interesting. So remember, by the Leviim, or by the Leviim, first by the Leviim, so Levi is the one in which the Torah explicitly says that they're to be shaved with a razor. That's Leviim is explicit. Nazir is the next most explicit because the Torah doesn't say that you're supposed to shave the Nazir with a razor. What does the Torah say? That Kol Yemei Neder Nizro Ta'ar Lo Ya'ava Arosho. All the days of his Nazirite vow, so a razor may not pass over his head, which we infer that what? That once the Nazirite vow is over, you use the razor. Okay, fine. However, when it comes to Mitzorah, there is no mention of razor at all. There's a mention of hair covering, there's a mention of a full body shaving, but there is no mention of razor. So Ela Mitzorah B'tar Minalam. So where do we know that Lamaisa again? Where do we know that Halacha Lamaisa you have to do with the razor? V'chi Teima Tisi Leviim. Maybe you'll say you'll learn out Mitzorah from Leviim, because you must remember, out of all three, the two that most resemble each other are Mitzorah and Leviim, because at least according to many, the shaving of the Leviim was also a full body shaving. So Lamaisa again, those two are very similar, but you can see here's the difference. Mash mal Leviim shekim tu'unin taglachas ve'in taglachas ela betar afani obvious mitzvah shehu ta'un taglachas ve'in taglachas ela betar. I could compare the mitzvah to the Levi, just like the Levi requires the shaving, and the shaving must be done with a razor. So too mitzvah requires a shave. So too mitzvah who requires the shaving must also be done with a razor. Here's the problem. Ikal mifrach. There's a kasha on that. What's the kasha? Mal Leviim shekim tu'unin tenufa begufam. We'll say one of the other interesting parts that the Leviim had to undergo was what? Was a waving. Remember, one of the miraculous events that happened when the Leviim were inducted is who did all of the tenufos? Aaron HaKohen. Right? Miraculously, Aaron picked up each Levi and waved them. So again, maybe you can't compare Mitzorah to the Leviim. Tomar ben Mitzorah, Dilo, but yet Mitzorah doesn't need a tenufa. Okay, so therefore perhaps we can't learn out Mitzorah. Remember, Rosa, we're trying to figure out how do I know that a Mitzorah ultimately again shaves his body with a razor. So I thought I was going to learn it out from Levi, but now we've just determined that, we've just established that Levi has a certain chumrah is maybe the wrong word. It's not really chumrah, but has a certain element that is different than Mitzorah. Elotisimi Nazir. So maybe I will learn out the obligation for the Mitzorah to shave himself with a razor from Nazir. Malu Nazir shekem karbanoton lechem tar b'mitzorah delo. So it says here's the issue. Nazir also has a unique aspect that it does not share with Mitzorah, namely that what? That when it comes to Mitzorah, so when it comes to Nazir, so there are loaves of bread that accompany the Nazirite carbon. That does not apply by Mitzorah. Ela mechada lo asya teisini tarvayon. So we'll say, so now here's what comes down. I can't learn out the obligation for Mitzorah to shave with a razor from either Nazir or Levi, because remember, both of them have unique aspects. But maybe I could learn out Mitzorah from Levi and Nazir combined. We'll say that's what's called, what the Gemara is going to do is called the Sad Hashava, a common denominator. So watch this. So the Gemara says, so Tisi Mitarbayon. So Mehai Tisi. So on one hand we can say, which one can we learn it out from? Tisi Milevim. So the Gemara is going to go backtrack through the steps again. If you tell me I should just learn out from Levim, namely that just like a Levi shaves with a razor, so to Mitzorah shaves with a razor, we can't do that because Mal Levim Shkem Tunin Tenufa Begufan. Because remember again, the Levim require a waving, which is an obligation that does not apply by Mitzorah. So Nazir Yochiach, so then maybe I'll learn it out from Nazir, because Nazir doesn't require a waving, and yet requires a shaving with a razor. So to Mitzorah should require waving with a shaver. You can't do that. Why? Because Mala Nazir Shekin Karbano Ta'on Lechem. You can't do that. Why? Because by a Nazir, the offering, the Nazirite offering requires loaves of bread, which is an element that is not present by Mitzorah. So to which the Gemara says, Levim Yochichu. But 1 second, so let's go back to compare it to Levium, because Levium doesn't require bread, but you can't do that. Why? Because Levium requires tenufa, and therefore the Chazir Adin. We'll say this goes on and on and on and round and round, and therefore going to have to say Lo Rizeh Krizeh, V'lo Rizeh Krizeh. On one hand, again, there are elements of Mitzorah that are not like Levi. There are elements of Mitzorah that are not like Nazir. There are elements of Nazir that are so we'll say, what is the common denominator? What is the common meaning? Again, so here's what we know. We know that Levi has to go ahead and shave with a razor. We know that Nazir has to go ahead and shave with a razor. What we also know is that Lamais, again, both of them have similarities and things that are dissimilar. So what's common denominator? Here's common denominator. So he says, Tu'unin taglachas, both Levi as well as Mitzorah require shaving, but taglachas and betar, and their shaving has to be done with the razor. Af ani obvious hamitzorah, so too now I want to include mitzorah, shutan taglachas, but taglachas or betar. Well, see what the Gemara is doing? What the Gemara is doing is establishing common denominator. What's the common denominator between Nazir and Levi? The common denominator is they both require a shaving, and they both have an obligation to go out and do that shaving with what? With a razor. So what I could say is anything else that shares that common denominator should fit into that klal. Therefore what? Therefore Mitzorah, who also requires a shaving, should have that shaving done how? With a razor. Sarah Shabbat. Armali Rava Mibarnish. Oh, Baruch Shekivanta. I was going to ask that. Baruch Shekivanta. Amali Rava Mibarnish, the Ravashi. So Rava of Barnish said to Ravashi, I don't understand. V'lifroch ma lahatzad hashava shebahen. Why don't you say the following? Why don't you ask the following kasha? Maybe the common denominator is shekain ein karbano bedalos. So also maybe you could say like this: the common denominator between Nazir and Levi is that there is no separate carbon for those who are poor. Look at Tosas, top Tosas on the daf for just a moment. Ein karbano bedalos ela carbon kavua bein aniyim ashirim. Excuse me, bein aniyim bein ashirim. So this is actually very interesting. The halacha is that when a Nazir has to bring his carbon, there's one set. Meaning there's one kind of Nazirite carbon. It doesn't depend on your financial situation. So too in the Levium, were inducted into the Levios. They also brought a specific type of carbon. But yet, Tomar b'mitzorah shekarbano bedalos. It's not true because by mitzorah, what's the halacha? By mitzorah, ultimately, again, there is a separate type of carbon. If you are poor, again, Tosas points out over here, shem anihu maybe tziporim. I will say that if a person is poor, let's say a person has saras, and now again he's going through his purification process, and he is poor, he doesn't have to bring an animal, rather he brings birds. So I will say, so what the Gemara is suggesting over here, what Rava of Barnish is asking on this is maybe your tzara shava is not good. You're trying to create a common denominator between, on one hand, you have Nazir and Levi, on the other hand, you have Mitzorah. You're trying to include Mitzorah in the cloud that is created by Nazir and Levi. Just like Nazir and Levi have a shaving, and the shaving must be done by a razor, so it's Mitzorah who has a shaving, the shaving must be done by a razor. But they're dissimilar to a certain degree for a simple reason, for a carbonic reason, that Mitzorah has a what's the right word? I guess maybe it's a sliding scale carbon. Is that the right terminology? A financial sliding scale carbon. But Levios and Naziros don't have that. So perhaps again they're just in dramatically different categories. I'm sorry. This was a one-time in history event where the Levium were inducted into the Levios. They brought a carbon, an animal carbon, a sheep. a sheep or a goat or an ace. It was one of those two. So the Gemara says, Amar le Rava bar Meshashia le Rava. So Rava bar Meshashia said to Rava, and this is really Nehemiah's question. Hi Tana. So we'll say, remember, here's the kasha. Hi Tana, meikara Amar lelamdo mimitzora efshar she'ein danin kal mechamar lahachmir alav v'hadar Amar nelef midina. Umidina nami lo yalev. So we'll say. So let's go back for just a moment. If you remember in yesterday's daf, the Gemara. Remember again, we had a whole discussion about how we know that a Nazir goes ahead and shaves with a razor. That was yesterday's discussion. So remember again, we had a discussion about ta'ar or la ya'ava rosho. So the Gemara said, by the way, the easiest way to learn out that a Nazir requires a razor is how? Is from Mitzorah. But yet the Gemara said that we can't learn it out from Mitzorah. Why? Because Mitzorah is Chomer. Mitzorah is considered to be more stringent than Nazir's for a variety of different reasons, but on the most basic level, because the Mitzorah requires a full body shaving, whereas the Nazir just requires a shaving of his head. So yesterday, when you wanted the source for the fact that a Nazir shaves with a razor, you were tempted to learn it out from Mitzorah, but then you said you can't learn it out from Mitzorah because Mitzorah is more Chomer. And now what are you doing in today's daf? Now what you're saying is there's no real source. We're looking for the source for Mitzorah to shave with a razor. And where do you want to learn that out from? You want to learn it from Nazir. What's going on over here? So again, let's read that once more. So Amar Rava bar Mishashi Rava. Hi Tana. So this Gemara again, this Tana meikara Amar lelam domi Mitzorah efshar. He said to us that you can't learn out Nazir from Mitzorah. She'ein danin kal mechamer lahachmir alav. Because you can't learn out something which is lenient, i.e. Nazir, from something which is Chamar, i.e. Mitzorah, in order to create a stringency on the Nazirus. V'hadar Amar, Nelef Medina. And then you wanted to learn it out over here. We'll say, if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, V'hadar Amar Nelef Medina. Actually, take a look at the Rashi, I'm sorry. V'hadar Amar Nelef Medina, Mitzorah Minazir, Ubedina Gufalo Kaimla. Right? And yet then you wanted to go ahead and learn out Mitzorah from Nazir, and yet, again, it doesn't seem to have worked out. Amar le'ahu aliba dirab Amar le, hahu aliba dirabanan, ha aliba dirabi Eliezer. To which the Gemara is suggesting that yesterday's Gemara was according to one opinion, and today's Gemara is according to another opinion. We'll say, now take a look at the Rash for just one more moment. So listen to this. Aliba dirabanan, so Braisa de Lael, the Pshit. So I will say, see here, so before we go into this, see here's what we have. The Braisa yesterday takes it for granted. I shouldn't say it's for granted. According to the Braisa yesterday, it is explicitly clear that a Mitzorah does his final shaving with a razor. So clear that there's even a Havamina that we shall learn out Nazir from Mitzorah, but we can't because Mitzorah is too Chamer and Nazir is too Kal. That's one Braisa. The Braisa today indicates that what? That Nazir we know requires a razor, but Mitzorah, we're looking for a source. So what the Gemara is going to suggest is that the two Braisos are reflective of two different opinions. Look at the Rash for just a moment. So the Rash says, Aliba de Rabbanon, Price de Lael de Pshita le Tarbe Mitzorah, Rabbanon he kitim afarish azah. So we'll say yesterday's daf, the Bryce that seemed to take it for granted, not take it for granted is the wrong word, the Bryce that seemed to feel that it was explicitly clear that a Mitzorah shaves with a razor, that reflects the view of the Rabbanon. Next Rush, Vaha, the body lemelef hacham Mitzorah minazir v'lo kam leidina Rebbe Lazar here. But this Brisa, which wants to learn out the obligation for a Mitzorah to use a razor from Nazir, but yet it didn't really make that conclusive limud. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Now we'll say, now what machlokis is this? Now listen to this. Ve'eno chayiv ad shilak tenu b'tar. And Abba say, now understand what we're going to do. We're going to start a process today that we're not going to finish. It's going to go into tomorrow's daf. But here's a suggestion the Gemara is putting out there. That according to the Rabbanan, it is pashat and clear that a Mitzorah has to use a razor. It's clear. It's clear. Abba say, now what's the novelty in that position? Even before we explain what's the novelty in that position, Torah doesn't say it. Torah never uses the word tar by Mitzorah, but yet again, The Rabbanan's position is it's explicitly clear that a Metzora has to use a razor. On the other hand, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who's not sure. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who, again, according to the Rush, wants to learn it out from a Gzer Shava, Tzad HaShava. So we're going to delve into the explanations of the Shitos of the Rabbana and Rabbi Eliezer. Today's daf we're just going to cover the rest of today's daf. We're just going to cover the Rabbanas. Take a look. This not the Eno Chayiv Ad Shilak Teno Betar. You are only chayiv when you cut with a razor. I will say now here we're going on a total detour. This is not talking about Levi, Nazir, or Mitzvah. Rather, this is talking about the general prohibition to shave the corners of your head with a razor. Take a look at Rashi. Take a look at the Rashi for just a moment. Tisnan ve'ino chayiv ad shilak teno betar. You're only chayiv when you cut it with the razor. Gabi hashchasas pa'as zikan. Misna b'makos. So we'll say this is the Mishnah Maseches Makos, and this is talking about destroying the corners of the beard. So again, halacha l'maisa, again, I can't go ahead and destroy the corners of the beard. So what does that prohibition apply to? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu liktu b'mal. I'm sorry. You're only chayiv if you use a razor. Rabbi Eliezer Omer afilu likto b'malaket or berehitani chayiv. Rabbi Eliezer on the other hand says, no, even if you use a razor, malaket or berehitani are planes, a sharp-edged plane. A sharp-edged plane. Take a look at the Rush again. B'malaket kli umnus shekorin plaino shemechalkin bahen trisin. So this would be something trisin Rabosai is it's not like in modern Hebrew a tris, right? Trisin are their doors. Then what they used to do is they were actually window shutters. So what they used to have is they would have windows that served also as doorways, and they'd have pieces of wood that they would put into the windows, shutters, but not shutters like this, not on hinges. Shutters that ultimately are put in and taken out. So they would shave down the shutters to smooth them out, to make them even. That's called a plane. So Rabbi Eliezer therefore says, even if you shave your face with the edge of the plane, you're chayiv as well. So says the Gemara, why do the rabbis hold that you're only chayiv for destroying the sides of your face, for destroying the peos? Remember, this is really the din of peos. But peos, remember, is not just up here. Peos also refers to the 5 different corners of the face that one is not permitted to go ahead and shape with a sharp edge. So why do the rabbis say this prohibition only applies with a razor? Disanya, because we learned zikano. The pasuk says over here, and this is talking about over here. This is talking about the Metzora. So the Torah says, "Vayoba yom hashvi yigalach es kol saro." It will be on the 7th day that he will go ahead and shave all of his hair. Es rosho ve'es zikano ve'es kaboseina ve'es kol saro yigalech. He's going to shave all of his hair, and then the pasuk says, his beard, his eyebrows, all of his hair he will shave. So the Gemara says, "Matam. Why does it have to say his beard?" Remember again, I will say by the Metzora, it already says what? It already says all of his hair. Why does it have to point out his beard? So the Gemara says, "Matam lomar levishenemar upasik halam yolo yigalechu." Because I would have thought that what the Torah says that you're not permitted to shave your beard with a sharp edge. Yachala filu Metzora. So we'll say, listen to this. So I might have thought like this. On one hand, the Torah tells me that by the Metzora he has to cut all of his hair. But yet the Torah also says that what? You may not shave your beard with a sharp plane. So I might have thought that prohibition also refers to a Metzora. Therefore, Tamulomar Zikano. Therefore, as much as the pasuk said that the Metzora has to shave all of his hair, the Torah makes special mention of the beard. Why? To tell you that a Metzora has to even shave his beard. And how do we know that ultimately, again, this is referring to a razor? Now, what the Gemara is really asking over here is, how do I know that the prohibition to shave my beard is with a razor? Because the Torah says that you shall not go ahead and shave the corners of your beard. I might have thought that if I cut my beard with scissors, that I should be chayiv. Talmud lomar v'lo sashchis. Oh, but the pasuk says what? You shall not destroy. So what does destroy mean, Abosai? So cutting with scissors does not get down to the root. Sashchis means to mamish uproot the hair. So I might have thought that's the case. Using any sharp edge should make me chayiv. Talmud lomar Upa'as zikanam lo yigalechu. Therefore, but the pasuk says, that you shall not shave the corners of your beard. So it's not just that you can't go and cut the hair. You can't shave it. Rabosai, see, understand the competing values over here. Haketzad ezohu giluach sheyesh bo ashchasa. So the Torah tells you two things. Number one, I can't destroy the corners of my beard, and number two, I may not shave the corners of my beard, which means that the only thing that is prohibited is a type of shaving that causes destruction. I will say, what is considered to be a normative act of shaving that causes destruction? That's with what? Havi Omer Zetar, that's a razor. Meaning that you could use other blades, but you can't use any blade. But the idea is, if you were to use a plane, right, to shave, that's not called giluach. That's not called shaving. Why is that not called shaving? Because it's called carpentry, right? It's called facial carpentry, right? Because people don't shave like that. So the Torah is prohibiting a normative act of shaving, but it's a type of shaving that ultimately causes hashchasa, that causes destruction of the hair. What's the type of shaving that causes destruction of the hair? It's only a razor. So now if we bring this full circle, so here's what we have. So the Rabbanan therefore understand that the Torah, when telling me about the prohibition to destroy the corners of my beard, tells me two things. Tells me, number one, that I can't destroy the corners of my beard, but also tells me I can't shave the corners of my beard. So what is a normative form of shaving that causes destruction? That's a razor. Now, I plug this back in. Therefore, say the Rabbanan, that's why the Torah by the Mitzorah, even though it says the Mitzorah has to shave all of his hair, the Torah specifically identifies what? The Zikan, the beard, to teach you that the Mitzorah shaves even his beard with what? With a razor. So now the Gemara says, now watch this. Watch this, says the Gemara, umimai. Now, I'm sorry, I skipped that a little bit. Mimai. So now we've established on both sides that the general prohibition of shaving the corners of your beard is with a razor. But how do we know that this is what the Mitzorah is shaving with? How do you know the Mitzorah is also supposed to use a razor? So maybe by a Mitzorah, Rabosai, all I need is what? I need a full body shaving. But maybe that could be accomplished with a plane or any sharp edge. Who says it has to be a razor? So maybe he's coming to teach me that what I can fulfill the mitzvah of full body shaving with any sharp edge. And maybe what the Torah is telling me is what? Not that I have to use razor, but what? I can. That if I use the razor, I'm not chayav for that. So the Gemara says, but that doesn't make sense. Because if a Mitzorah could satisfy the full body obligation with using any sharp edge, then what? Lishtok kra mine. The pasuk doesn't have to say anything, meaning the pasuk already said you have to shave all your hair. The pasuk does not have to go back and state again what? The beard. So don't say anything. Va'ana amina, and I would have said, Umma gabi Nazir di isura ka'avid. I would have said the following: when it comes to Nazir who violated an Isser. And I will say now, what an Isser did the Nazir violate? So by becoming a Nazir. Remember again, the Gemara is reflecting the view of Rabbi Lazar HaKavar, who holds that becoming a Nazir is Usser to begin with. So if by a Nazir who violated an Isser in order to become a Nazir, afilu hachi mechayiv, nevertheless what? Nevertheless, I will say he has to use a razor. Here, all the more so, where Rabbi says he's doing a mitzvah. Now, what does that mean? That by undergoing the process of purification of the mitzvah, he's doing a mitzvah. Certainly, he can use a razor. Visu, and furthermore, Furthermore, if you want to say that the Mitzorah could satisfy his obligation by using any sharp plane, midlo kasiv tar, kereish lakish, then we get into an issue of reish lakish to Amar, kol makom sha'ata motzi aseh velo saseh. Because reish lakish is any time that you have a situation where you have a positive commandment and a prohibition, if you can go ahead and uphold both of them, good. V'im lav, and if not, yavo aseh v'yitchelos aseh, then the aseh is dochelosa. The aseh sets aside los. So what does this mean? What the Gemara is saying is like this: if you want to tell me that by the Mitzorah could accomplish his full body shaving, how? With something other than a razor, So why would you ever be permitted to use a razor? In other words, if you could accomplish, so meaning even Rish Lakish who says that asay docha lo sasay, that a positive commandment sets aside a prohibition. That's only what? That's only when? When the only way to fulfill the asay is through the violation of the lo sasay. But if there's a way to fulfill the asay without violating the lo sasay, you don't violate the asay. So therefore, again, if you're going to tell me that a mitzvah could go ahead and what? Could go ahead and fulfill his full body shaving with a straight edge, not with a razor, then what's the havamina that he could use a razor? Therefore, let's say loop this full way back. But therefore, the fact that the Torah says zikano when it didn't mean again. So therefore, the Rabbanan are going to say this. Let's construct this argument methodically. So first of all, number one, the Rabbanan teach us an important halacha, which is that the only time you're chayiv for quote-unquote shaving with a straight edge is when if you use a razor. Now why a razor? I don't understand why doesn't the prohibition apply if I just take out my pocket knife and shave with my pocket knife as well? To which the Rabbanan say because the Torah is makbid, the Torah is clear in its verbiage that you're only chayiv for a form of giluach. That's hashchasa. For a form of giluach means shaving, a normative act of shaving that destroys the hair. What's the only normative act of shaving that destroys the hair? That's a razor. Therefore, I'm only chayiv for shaving my face, cutting the corners of my beard if I use a razor. Fine, that's piece number one. How do we know, therefore, says the Rabbanan, that by the Mitzorah he also has to use a razor? Because the Torah goes out of its way to, on one hand, say the Mitzorah has to shave all of his hair. But yet the Torah goes back out of its way to say what? To say what? That he has to shave his beard. If you already told me he has to shave his hair, I know he has to shave. Why are you stating he has to shave his beard? To which the Rabbanan posit why? To teach us that dafka, the giluach of the Mitzorah, is also with the tar, is also with the razor. Maybe you'll say, you could use a razor if you want, but you could use anything else. That doesn't make any sense. Why? Because if there's a license to use anything else, then what? Then you shouldn't be able to use a razor. Therefore, the Rabbanan feel the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to say that the Mesorah has to shave his beard is telling us, the Torah is telling us that he has to shave with a razor. And the novelty over here is what? That even though normally such a shaving would be prohibited, for the Metzorah, it's ultimately permitted. Rabbi say, so this is the shita of the Rabbanon, that halacha l'maisa, again, the shaving of the Metzorah is only done with what? The shaving of the Metzorah ultimately is done with a razor. And Rabbi say, now why is this important for us? Because the Braisa in yesterday's daf that was unequivocally clear and solid and certain that the shaving of the Metzorah is done with the razor is reflecting whose opinion? Reflecting the view of the Rabbanan. Rabbi will stop over here, and Amir Hashem we will pick up with the shita of Rabbi Eliezer Torah. But just to be clear, what we are trying to figure out is we had a contradiction of Braisos. Braisa yesterday indicated that the shaving of the Metzorah is done with a razor. The Braisa today was unsure. The Gemara is suggesting it's not a stira, it's just a machlokes. Now we've established that the shita of the Rabbanan, they are unequivocally sure that the shaving of the Metzorah is done with a razor. That's yesterday's Braisa. Today's Braisa, which reflected some level of uncertainty, that's Rabbi Eliezer, whose shita we will Amir Tashem B'Sha'at Tov Matzlachos explore tomorrow. Shkoyach.